Hey guys. So we are doing a quick lecture, and again, we've already done this in class. So I do want to point out. Ooh, I just need to. Darn it! I need to fix this real fast. All right. Now, with that said, we're going to look at these a little bit quicker than we did in class, of course. But we're looking at in each of these three lectures, it's really about how the scientific revolution impacted the different areas. Right? We're going to talk about in the area of women. Eventually, we're going to talk about in England and France. And then we're going to talk about the whole concept of religion and the scientific method. But right now, we're going to start with the ideology of women. And again, we need to make sure you have defined ideology. Ideology is a group of beliefs that have been systematically connected to prove something. And these are not just random beliefs. When I think of an ideology, think about it like an ideology of religion is a theology, right? It's a religious beliefs that are nice, tight, and I believe in it. I can hold on to it, and then I can prove other people wrong. Typically, when we start talking about the ideology in our class, in my class specifically, we will begin to talk about dogmatism, right? Dogmatic. And this ideology of women is not really, it's not created at all by women. It's going to be created by a group of men who are seeking to cement their permanent hold over society. And the cool, hip feminist word is the patriarchy, right? So let's talk a little bit. And as we develop this, we are going to highlight three outliers. I'm going to do this really quickly because, again, I'm pretty sure you can read. So let's go ahead and look. We talk a little bit about Margaret Cavendish. These are the three outliers that kind of transcend the sexes of the age, but they still are. They're still part of it, right? We see Dr. Spivogel says not a popularizer of science, but a participant. So she is a scientist. She's attempting not to see the world through a woman's lens, but through a scientist's lens. Unfortunately, society's not going to let her do that. We know that she was rejected out of the Royal Society despite her success. And from what I understand, scientists, they still look at these works, the observations upon experimental philosophy, as well as grounds of natural philosophy. We see her rooted into criticism of the direction 17th century science was going. She was challenging, saying, hey, why are we trying to dominate nature? We should use science to study nature. And she challenged that. And I talked about in class, I always wonder, did her gender, being a woman, make it see the world differently? Is it because she was excluded from society regardless of gender? Is that why she saw the world differently? Or is she just an individual who sees the world differently? Those are three lenses that, if you pursue that, it could be a cool research topic in your senior year. If you like science and history, you can combine that. But again, it's just kind of interesting. But I do want to point out Margaret Cavendish, who is a British scientist who participated in scientific debates of the time. She had evidence of success with her two works. She did criticize the direction of science, and yet science is going to alienate her because she's a woman. We talked about Maria Marian. We talked a little bit about her being an entomologist who studies plants and insects, really insects. And again, really totally cool. We see that she moves. She moves out of Europe, out of the Netherlands. She goes to Suriname and she studies bugs. And again, I do have to ponder, right? Did she flee this for her love of science? Or did she flee because she was tired of being dominated by men? I do think, again, that could be something that you're interested in research your senior year. Totally cool. But when you see this, I do want to point out this image here, a way cool image. These are examples of her illustrations. These illustrations will be the standard in all these different bug textbooks all the way into the 20th century. It won't be really until photography, and really, it's really about digital photography that we begin to see her work become outdated. So this is going to be like 300 years that her work's still there. It's kind of cool. I think, again, it's interesting. But again, despite her success, she's not going to be part of the scientific community. We talk a little bit about Maria Winkelmann. We talk about her being a German astronomer. We've talked about that in Germany because of the workshop setup. 1 out of every 7 astronomers were women. They worked under their fathers. And again, kind of interesting. You can talk about that. And again, that could be something you're interested in your research later. But she was absolutely successful in her observations. We saw in the textbook that she saw a comet that all the men astronomers didn't. And let me just tell you, some of the men were salty. They're like, how does she do this if we're not able to do this? But with that said, no, despite her successes, you should have noticed once her husband died, she's going to be kicked out of the Berlin Academy. That one guy said, mouths would agape, which means open up like, oh my gosh, how can we have a woman inside our midst? She's a woman. So despite her successes and the evidence that she's an expert, she was excluded because of gender. So the two people who are kicked out are people who stayed in Europe, and the one person who has relative success long term is the one who flees. I wonder what that looks like, and conclude yourself. But with that, this slide is probably the most important. This is, I do need to fix it. This is about the ideology of women. Oh, ideology, I can't spell. And that ideology is really going to prove the natural inferiority of women. They're going to see it. And I need you to understand, I think maybe I'm rushing a little too much. I want to pause here. Remember, scientists are finding natural orders everywhere. Newton has discovered the natural order of the universe with gravity and the Newtonian world machine. Harvey has discovered the natural order of the human body. The heart is the center of the circulatory system. Lavoisier has found the natural order of the chemistry by identifying how to label the chemical order. We see the natural law of conservation of matter that he discovers. So we're seeing all these laws and orders. And the element was these natural laws found the natural order, and the natural order is stable. And the fear was, what happens if there's a disruption to the natural order? Well, and I teased a little bit, but what happens if you get rid of gravity? What happens to the natural order of the universe? It collapses. Well, these men are going to use that same mentality when they study women. They're going to look at gender roles, society, stability, the natural order, and they think they found it. And they found it rooted in the Chorales de Femmes. These are those medieval debates about the role of women. Women are excluded from these debates. So men are debating other men about the roles of women. So women are going to have a say. And as this kind of goes through, look what Dr. Spielvogel puts here. The basis is still this sexist, misogynic idea that female women are prone to vice, easily swayed by sexuality. Hence, they need to be controlled by males. What that means is we have to have a patriarchal society in which men create the order and that women submit. Pretty interesting as we look at that, because it's almost as though women can't help themselves. They need a savior. And this is going to become the permanent information that we're going to see. And then what do? From these medieval arguments, the men are going to go out and find scientific evidence. They overemphasize the size of women's skulls, the pelvic areas being so broad. And they're like, see, women have smaller brains, wider hips, they have breasts to rear children. So therefore, the only thing they're good for scientifically is to be the domestic servants. They're going to bear and rear children. To bear means to have them. Rear means to raise up children. And that is what women are scientifically for. They're not meant to be educated. They're not meant to be equal of men. They are naturally inferior. And then we see this, and again, we see another thing. Women lose the role of midwifery. And midwifery typically is about childbirth, where women, a midwife, helps other women give birth. But it also is, in broader sense, about women's health. It's about the OBGYN, if you know, the idea about the internal workings of the female genitalia. That these midwives had this inside knowledge because they are women, but because of the scientific revolution has created this element that there's an enlightened science that's above this midwifery, and only men have access to it. Therefore, midwives are shut down. And during this time period, many of those midwives look a lot like witches. And we're going to see how they're alienated. So as we look at this, guys, the ideology of women is this quote-unquote scientific proven philosophy, collection of ideas that prove that women are inferior. It's really bad science. It's so untrue. And yet They are going to develop this, and it permanently becomes part of the Western paradigm. And we see these. We've talked about these quotes. Jean de la Bruyere, he is a French moralist. So he is the guy responsible for establishing the moral paradigm of the era. And he says an educated woman was no better than a gun, a collector's gun, which one shows to the curious, but has no use at all. Nothing more than a carousel horse. Women, I hope you're offended. I'm offended because I know women who are equals and superior to many of these men. And yet, what we see here is we have a moral paradigm being established that an educated woman has no use. Spinoza, another guy who has an awakening about religion that we've talked about. He's really a smart philosopher. He's a mathematician. He has uncovered many mathematical truths. And if you want to know about them, you can search them yourself. But look what he says. He has a whole treatise in your document, as a document in your book, where basically women have by nature not equal rights, but they necessarily must give way to men. There's a natural subservience. And remember, despite the scientific, intellectual, cultural growth of the Renaissance, of the Reformation, of the Age of Exploration, of all these things we've talked about, there's this complete shift. We're going into this modern era in which you and I are products of it. We see really cool stuff. But at the time this is happening, women are being left behind. This is where that concept of misogyny, you probably need to ponder that yourself. You may want to use this thing called Google. Kind of search out, to what extent is misogyny the reason behind this sexism? Again, that's totally up for you to talk about. So our conclusion, we see during the scientific revolution, a new ideology or a belief system about women was formed. We know there's a new systematic belief system that becomes permanently part of the Western paradigm. And once it becomes part of the paradigm, women are now excluded, and a minority that is being separated, being segregated. And they thought women were, in fact, weaker, less intelligent, and in general, inferior. Once that occurs, now we have to have supernatural, if you will, women who are able to rise up about those to transform. But in reality, we need a new ideology, and that's feminism. But that's what we kind of step through, right? So we see the transformation of the scientific revolution, and in the process, these men create a new ideology that women are inferior. I know it was a quick lecture. I hope that it was useful. Let me stop my share.